On a quiet night in 64 AD, a small fire breaks out in the crowded shops of the Circus Maximus. In any other city, it would have been just a tragedy, but this was Rome. It was a city of narrow alleys, tightly packed wooden tenements, and a population so vast that a spark could ignite a city. Over the next 9 days, the fire would rage, consuming 2/3 of the eternal city, turning its grand marble forums and humble homes into a mountain of ash. The world would forever remember this disaster with one name, Nero. But as the flames rose, was the emperor really playing his lyre and reciting poetry? Or was he the victim of a political conspiracy? The truth is, Nero was not even in Rome when the fire started, but in the chaos and devastation that followed, a new city would be born, built on the ashes of the old. The fire became a blank canvas for Nero's architectural ambitions, and the perfect excuse to blame a scapegoat. The story you know is of a mad emperor and a city in flames. The story we will tell is of political maneuvering, immense human suffering, and a secret truth that would give birth to the legend of one of history's most reviled villains. What really happened during those 9 days of fire, and how did Nero use a disaster to build an empire? Subscribe now to uncover the dark secrets behind Antiquity's greatest fire. The myth of Nero fiddling while Rome burned is one of history's most famous and enduring images of a mad, selfish tyrant. But this popular story is a gross oversimplification, a piece of political propaganda that has overshadowed the tragic and complex truth. The truth, as recorded by the most reliable ancient historian of the time, Tacitus, is that Nero was a considerable distance from the city when the fire began. He was at his villa in Antium, 35 miles away. When he heard the news, he rushed back to Rome and took personal command of the relief efforts. He opened his own palaces to house the homeless and organized food aid. So, where did the legend come from? It was a combination of Nero's eccentric reputation and his boundless ambition. Nero was a known lover of the arts, particularly Greek drama, and he was rumored to believe Rome's architecture was ugly and outdated. His dream was to rebuild Rome in a new, grand style. The fire, whether intentional or not, gave him the perfect opportunity. The myth of him playing the lyre, not a fiddle, as the fiddle didn't exist in his time, was a later embellishment, a piece of gossip that was twisted into a damning indictment. A symbol of a ruler who prioritized his art over his people's suffering. To understand the scale of the disaster, you must first understand Rome in 64 AD. This was not the city of grand, marble monuments we see in films. It was a sprawling, chaotic metropolis of over 1 million people. The heart of the city was a tinderbox of narrow, winding alleys and tightly packed tenements known as insulae. These multi-story buildings were made of wood and were incredibly prone to fire. The city was a maze of markets, workshops, and homes, a single spark away from catastrophe. For a ruler with Nero's architectural ambitions, this urban sprawl was a constant source of frustration. He dreamed of broad, straight avenues, grand colonnades, and fire-resistant stone buildings. The city was a perfect canvas for his vision, but it was already covered in a masterpiece of urban chaos. It would take a disaster of unprecedented scale to clear the way for his new city. The fire began on the night of July 18, 64 AD. Our primary source, the historian Tacitus, tells us it started in the crowded shops around the Circus Maximus, in an area filled with combustible goods and flammable oil. Fanned by strong winds, the flames spread with terrifying speed, sweeping through the narrow alleys where panicked citizens were trapped. The first night was pure chaos. The fire created its own wind, a fiery maelstrom that consumed everything in its path. For the next 5 days, the fire raged with a fury that defied all attempts to contain it. The city's small, disorganized fire brigades were powerless. The fire would die down in one area, only to erupt with renewed vigor in another. Nero, upon his return, organized firefighters and relief efforts, but it was not enough. On the 6th day, the fire was seemingly brought under control. But a new blaze erupted in the city's wealthier districts and raged for another 3 days. By the time it was finally extinguished, 2/3 of Rome had been consumed. The homes of the rich and the tenements of the poor were reduced to ash. Thousands were dead, and tens of thousands were homeless. A desperate sea of humanity wandering through the charred ruins of their lives. In the aftermath of the fire, The city was a ghost town, a blank canvas of scorched earth and rubble. The disaster created a political vacuum, and Nero filled it with decisive action. He offered aid to the homeless and organized a massive public works program to rebuild Rome. The new city was a radical departure from the old. Streets were widened, buildings were limited in height and made of stone, and firewalls were mandated. But Nero's benevolence was a double-edged sword. He seized a vast tract of land for his new palace, the legendary Domus Aurea, or Golden House. A colossal complex of gardens, statues, and extravagant halls. This act, more than the fire itself, sowed the seeds of distrust among the Roman elite. The whispers began. The fire was no accident. Nero needed a scapegoat, and he found it in a new, despised religious sect, the Christians. He accused them of being the arsonists, and a brutal persecution began. Christians were tortured, fed to wild animals, and crucified, their bodies set ablaze to serve as lanterns in Nero's gardens. This calculated act of political cruelty solidified Nero's reputation as a monster. The story you know is of a mad emperor and a city in flames. The story we will tell is of political maneuvering, immense human suffering, and a secret truth that would give birth to the legend of one of history's most reviled villains. What really happened during those 9 days of fire? And how did Nero use a disaster to build an empire? Subscribe now to uncover the dark secrets behind Antiquity's greatest fire. Our knowledge of this event is heavily reliant on the words of a few Roman historians. The most respected source is Tacitus, whose account in his Annals is our most detailed and objective record. He explicitly states that while many believed Nero was responsible, he did not find conclusive evidence, and he was critical of Nero's cruel persecution of the Christians. However, other sources, like the more sensationalist biographies of Suetonius, are filled with gossip and rumor. It was Suetonius who claimed Nero secretly started the fire and sang about the destruction of Troy as he watched it burn. Archaeological evidence, too, tells a story. Excavations of the fire layer in Rome have revealed the extent of the destruction, but they offer no definitive proof of arson. Instead, they show that the fire allowed Rome to reinvent itself. The fire was a catastrophe, but it was also a cleansing force, clearing away the urban decay of centuries and allowing for a new city, one built on a modern, rational design. The legacy of Nero and the Great Fire is a powerful lesson in how a narrative, a single piece of propaganda, can outlive the facts. Nero's act of blaming the Christians was a calculated political move to divert suspicion away from himself. It worked. The public, angry and devastated, needed someone to blame, and a small misunderstood religious group was an easy target. The fire became a turning point in Roman urban planning. The new Rome was a model of rational design, with wide avenues and a focus on fire prevention. The tragedy of the fire was that it was also an opportunity for one man's ambition to be realized. The old chaotic city was gone, and Nero's golden city was to be built in its place, a testament to his own vision and ego. In the end, the tragedy of the Great Fire was not just the destruction, but the lost opportunity to see it as a natural disaster. Instead, it became a political weapon. The fire was, in a sense, a catalyst for Rome's future, a brutal but necessary event that allowed it to shed its old skin and emerge as a new, grander city. The story of Nero and the fire is a study of how ambition can use chaos to create a new world, and how history itself can be rewritten by those in power. What do you think? Do you believe Nero was truly innocent, or was his political cunning proof of his guilt? Let us know in the comments. If you're fascinated by the dark and hidden lives of the people who shaped the ancient world, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And click here to watch our next video. The Colosseum's Hidden Secrets. The engineering that built an empire.